All right, first grade friends, we are going to go over our chapter 21, 22, 23 questions, and then we'll read just 2 chapters today, only 2, and then we'll see if we have homework work time or not before church. I'm actually going to just tell you what the answers should be kind of around for this. It's up to you. You're responsible to look over your answer. Do you have it close to the right thing? Do you have a proper, good 4th grade quality answer? Not just writing down, because that's not going to help you when it comes time for the assessment. Use our homework as practice. That's what homework is. At practice to do your best. Okay? All right, so number 1, Francesco said Salvatore got the key from the graveyard. Okay? Somewhere around a graveyard, right? Churchyard, graveyard. Churches usually have graves. Churchyard, graveyard. I think the book actually did say churchyard, though. You are right. All right. And then the initials SC got on the key because Salvatore scratched them in with Father Tommaso's pin. Father Tommaso's pin. If you just said he scratched them in, I would take that too. Any questions on number 1 or 2? All right. Number 3. New thoughts going through Dominic's mind were, how are we maybe like related, right? How is the key get to my family? What is going on? He's got a lot of thoughts going on. Number 4, who awakened the boys in the middle of the night? Father Tommaso awoke the boys because Salvatore is getting worse, right? He's dying. He's getting worse. Number 5. What suggestions did Dominic give to Signor Giasulu that seemed strange to them? He suggested they call an ambulance or go to the hospital. Good. Either one of those. Okay. This one was a little bit individual. How do you think Francesco felt as the older brother of Salvatore? Well, we know he feels sad, right? Okay. What else might he feel, though, as the older brother? Remember, what's his role? What is he feeling? Micah? A little guilty that he let him eat them. Good. What else, Thomas? Like he failed his brother. Lizzie? Worried, right? Like, he's not getting better. Amelia? Without his brother, it's going to be a sad, hard journey. Claire?
I think that Francesco felt it was his fault that he let Salvatore eat the tree.
Yeah, he's kind of taking it personally, right? Like, I was responsible for my brothers, and I let him do that, and now he's dying. So he feels all of those things. You are right. Good. All right, number 7. Why do you think Francesco joked with Salvatore about practicing his rope tricks? We talked about this while we were reading the other day. Remember, to try and lighten the mood, to make him laugh, to make him happier. Something along making him happier, a lighter mood. What was Salvatore worried about on his deathbed for number 8? He's worried about, Ryan? He's afraid of horses. He's worried about horses. How did Dominic try to comfort Salvatore? Dominic said something. Do you remember what he said to Salvatore to comfort him, Monica?
Dominic tried to comfort him by saying, like, the horse would probably recognize you.
Yeah, horses and cowboys recognize each other. Once you found your horse, there's nothing to be afraid of. They'll recognize you. Claire, something different?
Dominic comforted Salvatore and said that he will have a horse in heaven and will see his parents. Not exactly.
You didn't quite say that, but I get what you're thinking. Good answer, and really well worded. Amelia?
Dominic said that he was going to be a cowboy in America.
And he was going to be did Dominic say that? Remember? Francesco said that one. Good. This one goes a little tricky because there's a lot of people talking around that same time. Bennett? No, meeting the horse is like getting your best friend. Yeah, very similar to, was that Lizzie saying? No. Yes. I don't remember who started that question. Yeah, like meet your you'll just know, you'll get along. It's like meeting your best friend. What did Dominic give to him, to Salvatore? That's what that him means. What did he give to him? Maddie?
Dominic gave Salvatore
The buffalo head nickel. And why was that so significant that he gave him the buffalo head nickel? Lily, why is that so significant? You forgot? Think through. Why does Dominic have the buffalo head nickel? Why is it so important to him? Monica?
Because it's like kind of the only thing he has.
It was one of the few things that he had that he really cared about, right? He had his key, and that's gone. And then he had his buffalo head nickel. And now he gave that away to Salvatore. How do you think, we already talked about that one, how do we think it'll affect the story? It's going to be sad. It's going to be hard. Might keep reminding him about it. And now, Francesco said Dominic can come with him on the journey, right? Good. Then we had 4 on the back. Yeah, but we're kind of using all of the stuff that we know together there. That's okay. If you get something a little different, that's okay too. All right. According to Father Tommaso, how might life have been different for Salvatore in the United States? So Father Tommaso is saying if he had made it to America earlier, life would have been different. What would have been different for him? What would have been different, Zach? If he was in America, Father Tommaso said there would be medicine and doctors for him. You are right. That is awesome. You might have said something a little different, which is also awesome. Zane?
In America, he'd be alive.
And why would he be alive in America?
Because he'd be able to make it.
No, not quite the answer we're looking for. Amelia?
He didn't have to fill up on cherry pits because
He
he would have a family who would care.
would have had a family who would care for him. And instead of eating cherry pits, he would have had food, right? He would have had real meals, not just cherries and cherry pits. And birds that they left and forgot. So they didn't even get those plants. They probably just went bad sitting there. All right, number 2. What promise did Father Tommaso give the boys? Father Tommaso gave them a promise. Bennett?
Promise that he would lay Salvatore back in Alvaro next to Mama and Papa.
He would lay him to rest next to Mama and Papa. Perfect. Something along those lines of burying him next to their parents. Not just bury him, right? Specifically, Francesco was worried about that he's going to be forgotten, right? So he wants him next to Mom and Dad. Brooke?
Well, I actually said that kind of off of minutes, it's soon enough, Francesco will be with his mom and papa in heaven.
Yeah.
No, but Father Tommaso didn't promise. I meant Salvatore. Yeah,
He didn't.
Father Tommaso didn't promise that. He promised him being next to him.
Yeah, the promise that he specifically made was about burying Francesco. Or other one. Salvatore. He made the promise to Francesco about burying him. Okay? And the last 2, number 3. What do you think Father Tommaso meant when he was talking about the good and the bad in life? Give an example of your own bad to good experiences. We talked about this one yesterday a little bit. Christian?
My bad is that my great grandma died.
And what's the good to that?
That
She's in heaven, yeah. Sometimes bad things happen, but we look at the bright side with it. Anything else you want to add to that part, Bennett?
In life, we have to get you can get rewarded, but then you also kind of for life to be good, I guess. You also need bad stuff.
Yeah, we have good and bad things, so we realize how good the good is, right? What if everything was good? Would we know it's good? No, we have those bad things to remind us when we have something good. Rosie? After rain, we get a rainbow. That's an awesome idiom. I'm talking about those idioms we learned a long time ago. Good. Last one, Micah?
You have to get the good, the bad if you want the good, or else your life's gonna be perfect. But you probably won't have friends if you
If you only think about good. All right. And the last one. What did Francesco offer Dominic? What did he offer? What did he offer, Kateri?
Salvatore's ticket to America.
Salvatore's ticket to America. Francesco offered Dominic Salvatore's ticket. Perfect. All right, we've got two chapters to read today before we head to church. Luckily, it's only 10 pages between both of them, so they're short, so we'll be able to fit it in. All right, chapter 24, we're going to start with, and we ended, remember what the boys were sleeping up in their loft and they were sad? All right, so now we've got the next morning. They were awakened early so they could get down to the ship in time for boarding. Signora Giasulo had draped the front doorway in black silk, marking a death in the house. The new bishop, just transferred from Milan, had seen the doorway on his morning stroll and thought it was not normally done, and though it was not normally done, he stopped in to inquire about the deceased. He and Father Tommaso prayed together for Salvatore's soul. Meanwhile, the boys had gathered under the arbor for their breakfast. "The bishop does us the greatest honor in paying a visit," Dominic heard Signora Giasulo whisper to her husband as she laid the table with sweet cakes and fruit. Sitting there in the soft morning light, Dominic felt as if they had woken from a bad dream. If he closed his eyes, he could pretend that it was yesterday. He was listening to the bees buzzing overhead just as they had done the day before. The birds were singing their familiar songs, and the sun was as warm and comforting as it had been yesterday morning. It was almost as if everything was the same. But Dominic knew that inside the house something was very different. It was there, in the little sitting room, that the still lifeless body of Salvatore lay waiting for burial. The woman had washed him and combed his hair. Dominic and Francesco had taken Antonio in to see him. But Antonio was so upset that he had run from the room crying. He just couldn't believe that his brother would never wake up again. Even now, after they had finally settled him down under the arbor, Antonio kept looking back toward the house. Dominic knew that he was waiting for Salvatore to come walking through the doorway. Dominic himself almost expected to hear that familiar laugh and the excited talk about roping buffalo and eating linguine under the stars. Even Violetta seemed inconsolable, for she had gone under the table and would not come out. Father Tommaso and the bishop joined the others at the table. Dominic watched as the bishop dusted his chair with a handkerchief he had pulled from his sleeve before sitting down. Taking the utmost care, the bishop placed his fine silk hat on the bench beside him. "Such a fine hat, your lordship," Signora Giasulo commented. "Grazie, signora, thank you," the bishop replied with a satisfied smile. With a hefty sniff, he surveyed the boys and brought his handkerchief to his nose, as if he had smelled something bad. In a strained voice, he began to speak about the salvation of Salvatore's soul. Francesco sat grim-faced, while Antonio dipped his finger into a dish of jam. The bishop frowned. Why do you think the bishop doesn't like... What in this kind of leads us to think the bishop doesn't like the boys? Think through what we just read, friends. Why does the bishop maybe not like the boys? How can you tell that the bishop doesn't like the boys? Thomas? You're okay. They're not happy about him continuing to talk about it. Think, why is the bishop? How do we know? What is the bishop doing that's like, these boys, I don't know. They're not the best. Maddie? Just listen along. It's kind of disrespectful. And what did the bishop do right after that? He frowned, right? He's like, you just did that? Like, well, that was for everybody. You. How else do we know he's a little pretentious? He's thinks he's better than everybody else. What has he done? What's the bishop done that kind of shows he's pretentious? Lily? He wiped his seat with a handkerchief, right? He was like, not clean enough. What else has he done? Zach? Yeah. He put his hat on a seat. Do people normally take up a whole seat for a hat?
No.
What would you do with your hat?
Put it on my head or put it on.
Well, no, let's just put it on the
Like the table, yeah, or in your lap or something? Would you take up a whole seat for a hat?
No.
Think back to the hat. What else with the hat shows us that he's like, oh, yeah, I'm better? What else does Father do, or the bishop do? Bennett?
Well, it was a nice hat.
It was a nice hat. How do we know that he thinks it's a nice hat? How do we know he thinks it's a nice hat? Kateri?
Because he saved an extra seat for it.
He saved a seat for it. What else? Lily?
Where he, when he whenever
Uh-huh.
he had said, what a nice hat. And he said, thank you. But then he was like all satisfied.
Yeah, he had that satisfied smile. Like if somebody says thank you, you're kind of like, oh, yeah, thanks. Instead, he's like, thanks. Like, look at me. I'm satisfied. Rosie?
And during the he put his handkerchief up his nose as if he smelled like boys.
Yeah, like the boys are stinky, right? He put his handkerchief up and he was like, oh, that smell. Oh, my goodness. All right, let's keep reading. This was followed by a soft burp from under the table. Upon hearing this, the bishop raised his eyebrows, and the boys stifled their giggles. Senora Giasulo quickly changed the subject to church steeples. Grateful for the diversion, the grown-ups all turned in their seats to look at the steeple in the distance. It was then that Dominic heard a familiar nibbling sound and noticed that the bishop's hat was missing from the bench. He quickly kicked Francesco, who slipped under the table to retrieve the silk hat, which he quietly returned to the bench. What happened to the hat? Violetta. Father Tommaso was anxious to leave for the ship, and the boys were just as anxious to leave before the bishop discovered the remains of his hat. After a rushed goodbye, they were on their way, and they hurried along the cobblestone streets toward the dock. Dominic heard a faint cry coming from under the arbor that sounded like, "My hat! My hat!" Francesco had tied a rope around Violetta's neck to keep her safe as she trotted along beside him. All along the street, people talked excitedly about America and the ship, the New Amsterdam. Dominic smiled at the sound of it. America, he realized for the first time since he had come how much he missed his own country, and he was suddenly overwhelmed by homesickness. As much as he had loved the countryside of Alvaletto and the friendship he had found, he longed to see his familiar streets of Brooklyn. But as happy as he had been about going back to America, he couldn't help but feel the sadness that hung over the group now. The sadness of leaving Salvatore behind, the sadness of Salvatore's dream of going to America that could never come to be. On reaching the pier, Dominic discovered that theirs was not the only difficult departure. Everywhere, people cried and shouted goodbyes. Old women wrung their hands and grown men wailed like babies. Dominic remembered the ranger back at the museum saying that Ellis Island was known as the Island of Hope and also the Island of Tears. Now he saw how the tears could start even before the immigrants left their homelands. Slowly, they made their way past the many little stalls selling clothes, baskets, boxes, and anything that travelers might need for their journey across the ocean. They waited with Father Tommaso in one long line, and then another, nervously eyeing the crowd. If the Padrone's men had gone up north to look for them, they had nothing to worry about. But if they had changed their mind and headed south, Francesco would be in grave danger. After what seemed like hours, Father Tommaso finally handed their tickets to an agent, along with their papers. Dominic smiled at Antonio, who squeezed his hand. As the agent inspected their papers, Violetta tried to eat his shoelaces. "This is as far as the animal goes," the agent ordered in a gruff voice, shifting his foot out of her reach. "But she meant no harm," Francesco tried to explain. "No animals on board," the agent snapped. "But she's with me," Francesco told him. "Makes no difference," he replied. "No animals allowed." "She wouldn't know how to get along without me," Francesco pleaded. "We've never been apart, not one night. She wouldn't sleep or eat without me. Who would love her the way I do?" The shipping agent shrugged. You don't understand, Father Tommaso insisted, taking the agent's arm. The boy has a ticket for America, and she belongs to him. Surely he'd be allowed to take her with him. She's a very well-behaved goat. The agent shook his head. Sorry, Father. Passengers are not allowed to take animals. If they allowed animals, there would be no room for people. It's such a big boat, but it isn't an ark. Ah, such nonsense. One small goat. Who would care? Father Tommaso grumbled as he waved his hand in the air. Then he turned to Francesco, whose face froze when he heard the agent's words. Move forward now and leave the goat behind. We're going to have to pause there for now, friends. We will read as soon as we come back from church. So my friends who are online, check for part 2 of our video.